many we've done so far? A lot, right? Look here at this one. And they tell us that z equals -1 plus I. And they define z with a line over it, kind of like z with a repeating symbol. It's not. It's just a way that they can delineate z as the complex conjugate of that. What's the complex conjugate of -1 plus I? -1 minus I. And what do they want me to do? They want me to add those two things together, right? So I'm going to come down here and add those together to get z plus z with a line over it, or that's -1 plus I plus -1 minus I. And if we add those, we get -2. And then they added one more complication. They said, now graph that. Where would that be? Well, we're going to do more of graphing. We're going to do more of graphing of complex numbers right before we take the test. I put it in chapter 11, okay, because it really doesn't fit anywhere in our curriculum. But that's like -2 plus 0I. So -2 goes, the real number part goes right and left, and the imaginary part goes up, down. So that's point B, which would be answer B. And we'll do more of those right before we take the CLEP test, okay? We'll graph some more complex numbers right before, but I wanted to point out that this one had the complex conjugate in it, and so I want to put it in here so we could do that, okay? All right, well, what are we going to do with something like this? Well, go ahead. All right, so I think here's what you were telling me, that we could write this thing as a square root of -1 times the square root of 81 minus the square root of -1 times the square root of 144, because remember, these two things added together is the square root of -81. But we know that square root of -1 is I, and the square root of 81 is 9, so that really comes out to be 9I, minus, this would be I, and this would be 12, so that's minus 12I. And once we simplify those, then we can subtract them and get -3I. So if we have a square root of a negative number and we want to simplify it, simplify the radical first, and then add the like terms. Y'all with me? Let's try another one. What are we going to do to simplify this thing? Well, this is not an equation, okay? If this was equal something, yes, we'd multiply through by the least common denominator. But this is just an expression. So what are we going to have to do? Could we notice that this division bar is a grouping symbol? Remember, division bar is a grouping symbol. Can we simplify the numerator, simplify the denominator, and then simplify the whole thing? Yeah, we want to simplify the numerator, simplify the denominator, simplify the whole thing. So could I write that as -15 minus square root of -1 times the square root of 18? Let's go 2 times 3 times 3 over 33. With me so far? All I did was divide square root of -18 up into square root of -1, and then I prime factored 18. Well, I can bring a 3 out here, and that becomes an I, so I get -15 minus 3I square root of 2 over 33. Everyone good so far? Can I do anything else? Good. I can factor out the greatest common factor between -15, 3I, and 33, which is a 3. And so if I do, this becomes -5, this becomes -1I, and this becomes 11. So I could write my answer as -5 minus I square root of 2 over 11. That's a perfectly fine way of writing the answer. Can anyone think of another way we can write that answer and it still be correct? Bingo. Keep going. Minus the square root of 2, because that's the number part. Yeah. Minus the square root of 2 over 11 times I. Either one of these answers is a perfectly fine answer. If we only get used to doing this answer and it shows up differently on the CLEP test, it might scare us. We don't want to do that, so we need to make sure that we understand that those two are the same thing. Y'all with me? What are we going to do here? Well, before we distribute, though, we want to simplify and then distribute, okay? And remember, in order to simplify this, we could make that the square root of -1 times the square root of 2 times 2 times 3. And here that would be square root of -1 times the square root of 4 minus the square root of 2. You with me? But here I can bring out an I and a 2. Gosh, I did that wrong. I'm in trouble writing today. Okay, so I can bring out a 2 and I'm left with square root of 3. This would be I, and that would be 2 minus square root of 2. Or really, that's 2I square root of 3 times 2I minus square root of 2. Everyone with me on simplifying first? Now that we've simplified, what are we going to do? Distribute, all right? So if I distribute, I'm going to multiply those two things. That's going to get me 4I squared square root of 3 and negative 2I square root of 6. Can I simplify anything else? Good. I can simplify the I squareds, and that's going to get me negative 4 square roots of 3 minus 2I square root of 6. Can't simplify anything else, so now I'm done. Everyone good? Is this all clicking in? Making sense? Well, guess what? Those show up on the CLEP test too. Okay? Could I write this thing as the square root of -5 over the times the square root of 4 over the square root of -5? Is that okay? And then could I cancel those things and be left with the square root of 4? But what is the square root of 4 in simplest form? 2? Y'all with me? So we might get square roots of negative numbers on the CLEP test. We simplify those square roots of negative numbers using our eyes. Then we do whatever they ask us to. Multiply, divide, whatever it happens to be. Okay? How are we going to do something like this? Thinking about your order of operations, what would you do first? Good. Remember, we would think of those as kind of having brackets on them, because order of operations says we would look inside the parentheses. We can't do anything inside those parentheses. We'd go to exponents. We don't have any exponents. But then we do multiplication and division from left to right before we do this subtraction. So we're going to FOIL those two to get 16 minus 8i plus 18i minus 9i squared minus, here we're going to get 1 plus I minus I and minus I squared. Is everyone with me on the two FOILs? What does I squared equal again? -1. So that's really -9 times -1 or positive 9. And this is really a -1 or positive 1. So that's going to get me 16 and 9 is 25. Negative 8i and positive 18i is 10i minus, let's see, this is going to cancel with this, and 1 plus 1 would be 2. And now all I have to do is combine those like terms, and 25 minus 2 would get me 23 plus 10i. Not bad? Everyone good? I'm looking for some folks to shake their head because I'm getting some of this. Okay? That doesn't tell me anything, so help me. I like it when you guys call out answers and that kind of stuff. I appreciate it. And if you're not right, that's okay. I'll help you get right. Okay? So this is the same kind of thing. We'd have to FOIL these two things first, get our simplified complex number, and then add it to our other complex number. Same thing here. Same thing we kind of have here, but gosh, we got a complex number squared. How did we say we did that? How do we square a complex number? Write it out and FOIL it out. Okay, so really we've got 4 minus I times 4 minus I and 1 plus 2I times 1 plus 2I. So that's really just like what we were doing. We would FOIL out the complex numbers, and then once we get those answers, we would subtract. Everyone good? All right. And guess what? They do that same thing here. Okay? Same kind of thing. Here they want us to evaluate. In mathematics, what do we do? How do we evaluate something? Anytime we hear the word evaluate, we are going to do what? Substitute and then solve, right? So they tell us here that wherever there's an x, we can put in 1 minus 2i. So if I do that, I could come down here and say 1 minus 2i squared minus 2 times 1 minus 2i plus 5. All I did was wherever there was an x, I put in what they told me x equals. And how would I go about simplifying that? I'm going to FOIL this, I'm going to distribute that, and then I'm going to combine my like terms, right? Same kind of thing there. I would substitute in. Wherever there's an x, I would put in 4i, and then use my rules to simplify. Same thing there. Same thing there. Same thing there. And we're done. You with me? Does that all make sense? So, all of this stuff about complex numbers, it's going to show up on the CLEP test. We're hoping it shows up because those are kind of easy problems and we can handle those, right? All right. So anyone at home have questions about what we just went over? At home, if you don't have any questions, you may sign off and go and start looking at your homework. If you do have questions, stay on and unmute your mic and ask me those questions. Remember, if you are a virtual person, you will screenshot the progress bar graph and you will email that to me. If you are a hybrid A or hybrid B, you're going to actually show those to me in class. So only the virtual people, totally virtual people, the CVA students, would send me the email of their progress on modern states. Okay? Just those 2 modules this time. 2 points apiece, 4 points. Okay? So if you don't have any questions in your home, you're welcome to sign off and go start your homework or get ready for your next class. I'm going to stop I've stopped recording.